program to a pilot program for schools that gives a fair amount of money, and many schools are taking advantage of it, but the schools run out of money around March. So if there could be a little bit more money, could stretch a little further. Statewide crop insurance, there's a lot of concern about storms, drought, crop loss from climate change, whether crop insurance might be something that could be explored. We also wanted to look at the schools that are doing the right thing in terms of buying local produce. And there are a lot of factors that affect whether they do that or not, but a lot of it has to do with the food service directors. And if we could find a way to celebrate those food service directors and give them some recognition, perhaps that could have a ripple effect and more people would do that. We talked about organizing the farmers to speak out on immigration policies, and the fact that we have representatives in Congress and in the state legislature who are on the agricultural committees, Antonio Delgado and Jen Metzger. So we didn't come up with one thing, but we came up with a lot of different ideas. That's it. Thank you. Next.
Right here. Hi there. We spend part of the time going around introducing ourselves and talking about what we're doing and how we're connected and why we're here. And I felt like that was a very worthwhile discussion because some of the topics spun off of that. There was interest in support for setting up CSAs, for water access, for marketing, distribution, and connecting with that source. We talked about lack of quality housing, that's a concern for farm workers. And one of the ideas that was mentioned was, is there a mobile solution? Is there some way of creating something that would move and follow the farm workers around? We just spoke about language justice and the need for a positive narrative to add value to the farm workers and to provide resources and connection to those resources, whether it's through literature, signs, marketing, that it's in a variety of languages. We also talked about the interest in the Bienvenido Farm Workers Festival. That kind of sparked, there was a little bit of a fire at the table with that. People were very interested in that. I like the connection frame with New Paltz Apple Fest, but some forum locally that we could really highlight and celebrate our farm workers. With music, with food, with conversation, with celebrations. And also there was a point made, a historical reference to an event that used to happen years ago at Camp Epworth that had something to do with this. Maybe some people remember that.
It was called the Family Farm Festival.
Family Farm Festival. All right. Is that it? Okay. There we go. What's that? Oh, yes. I have that down. Year-round farming, we also talked about. And where do I have that? That we need to, that's on this one. There we go. That there are some farms nearby, the farm hub, I guess, has a high tunnel for winter growing, and that there's an interest in having a commitment to year-round farming so that you can keep those farm workers year-round. We talked about that. And as well as not only having work at the farm itself, but connections to other work in the area, if needed. And then we also talked about the potential for cooperative ownership of farms. And there was an interest in that. Good?
Thanks.
Okay, so at our table we came up with two main themes, one of them being education and the other being transportation. And for education, a lot of the subjects have already been touched on, have an increase in bilingual signage and printed information, to have labeling on local foods. There are so many different ways that foods can be labeled. They're organic. There's Farmers Pledge, which is a cheaper way to go organic for small organic farmers who can't afford to become organically certified, non-GMO labels, and there are also, in certain farms, there are fair labor practice labels, so you know that the food you're buying was produced by people who are all getting a living wage or fair labor practices. Then another way to educate the general public would be radio spots, or even a suggestion for having an agricultural show on Radio Kingston, perhaps, which is definitely connected with the Nova Foundation and the Farm Hub, and about a half-an-hour farming show on that radio station in Kingston, to bring an agricultural emphasis to the Ulster County Fair and all the other many local food festivals we have, like at least half a dozen of them every single weekend in the summer, and that would include things like the Bienvenida Festival. I don't know of any of those around here. Richard knew of some, I guess in other places. Agro-tourism is a great way to raise awareness about farms. There's a thing called farm stays, where you kind of go camping on different farms and take part in the activities on the farm. There are some great educational farms around, and Philly's Bridge is one of them, where students go to learn about farming. Seed Song Farm in Kingston is another one where they do an education component. And, one thing that Mary Ellen had spoken about in our planning meetings, and I just wanted to make sure everyone knew, was that we were concerned that you have these wonderful programs, but you don't always find the families who need them, because, of course, they're isolated and they're spread out throughout the county. And so some way to do more outreach to the families of farm workers, to let them know that these services are even available. And we realized that this kind of activity is even more difficult today in the atmosphere of fear that exists because of the current political situation. But it would be great if we could do that. And then, but the transportation, the fact that if you find people who need services, how do you get them to the services? And how to bridge that gap between farm workers and services, and also to take the burden off of farmers, who probably are the ones right now who very often do provide the transportation. So we were kind of imagining a volunteer fleet, a taxi fleet of renegade grannies or retirees who are on call, and they're like, well, so-and-so needs a ride. This group of kids from this farm needs a ride to the New Paltz pool in the summer when they're around the farm bored and school's out, and how do we get these kids to the pool? Or how do we get someone to a medical appointment? And if there are huge corps of, groups of volunteers in Ulster County, which I hear that there are certain people who have a lot of time and goodwill and like to volunteer, could we come up with some kind of local network of rides, taxis, some like Ulster County Uber or something that could take people where they need to go? Let's see, what else? There's, I was trying to remember, there's a little website called Ag Help. And when we were putting this conference together, Patty Madison came up with it. It was started by farm workers, and it is an online website where they share and help hook people up with what they need and what people can offer. And I'm not putting that very well, but Patty assures me that a whole list of similar resources will be available. We were hoping to print it and have it as a handout. But Nancy says it's on the website right now of Mohawk Consultations. So Ag Help, if you go and look what Ag Help is, it's a wonderful resource. It's the very first one. Okay, starts with A. All right, thanks, that's it.
We talked about transportation too, so this follows up right on what Sarah was just saying. Evelyn talked about 511 rideshare and whether there could be something spun off from that that could pool worker transport, be paid by employer, sponsor, or users. Maybe there could be a van pool, but we spent a lot of time talking about the need to somehow congregate existing resources in such a way that people who are already doing one thing could provide this other service. And along those lines, we also talked about wine trails and U-pick farms, places that are sort of like tourist entities that could maybe also have a backside where they use their resources to support transportation needs. Lachelle had an interesting idea about an app that would be used in farm-to-table restaurants where after you have your meal, you can elect to donate an additional $1 a la Hannaford's or some of these places that are always hitting you up for donations, but they would go to nonprofits that are actively helping farm workers. Could that also be tied to Restaurant Week or Chronogram or a website called Field Goods that Evelyn told us a little bit about? We also talked about celebrating farm workers and associating that with the New Paltz Apple Festival. Oh no, that was someone else I started to take notes about. Never mind, I'm done.
Go ahead.
Okay, at our table, I think we covered a lot of the same discussions that other tables had. We started by focusing on the farm worker issues. Farm workers in general, as we discussed, are not respected, and often they're not proud of themselves, even though they may like what they're doing a great deal. So we also talked about engaging the farm workers with the community in different ways, and also talked about the event potential for inviting farm workers or having an event that celebrates farm workers. But we also talked about potentially engaging them in community education, for instance, when there's programs in community college relating to farms, engaging farm laborers who come to those programs and participate and share their experiences and their knowledge because they're very knowledgeable about farming. And kind of reversing the direction of the flow of knowledge, making sure that farm workers are engaged in some of the education programs that are available, and the programs are offered in bilingual settings or bilingual opportunities so that farm workers who don't necessarily have English as their first language can participate and also become engaged and better at what they're doing too, and maybe have other opportunities or better opportunities for the future. In terms of the conditions for farmers, farm workers, excuse me, it's a difficult nut to crack because many of the farm workers are undocumented. They work very hard. They don't have that much time or ability to organize. So I think at the end of the day, this is not a specific recommendation, but we did agree that it has to be recognized amongst groups like this that we all have a responsibility to be active and to work with our politicians and to let our politicians know our positions on farm labor and the needs. And by the way, if I forget something, I hope people at my table will remind me. One of the ideas was a kind of a Habitat for Humanity type organization to work on the farm labor housing, to maybe get people who are willing to put in time to work on improving farm labor housing and provide, actually help construct it and work with local communities to make sure that local regulations don't form a barrier or inhibit the participation in building the new housing. We also talked, although we didn't really get a chance to explore this, about sweat equity. You know, a lot of people may be aging out of their farms, or there isn't farmland available. If there was a program that could make it, in essence, make the farmland available to people who want to work on it a certain number of years, and at the end of that period, they would then be able to own it in some sense. In terms of the farmers and the farms themselves, there is a fundamental problem, which I think we've discussed here, if not at the forum, it was mentioned at the conference, that Americans really aren't willing to pay that much for their food. And that's a real issue because then you have the pressure on the farms, and the farms in turn, it's trickle-down pressure on the farm labor. So, there are different ways to make it easier for the farmers. I know that there's a great deal of interest in a lot of communities, and it's been done here buying the development rights. But as it was discussed at our table, that can be a good idea, but in practice it doesn't always work that well because it's so restrictive that sometimes the land in essence is not farmed eventually because it's very hard to do. You can just develop the farm structures and do what you need to do to conduct an active farm if you're just buying development rights. So you probably need something more than that. One of the programs, it was very interesting that I didn't know about, apparently. The city owns a lot of land. It's part of the watershed land. And you can get this land, you can acquire this land to farm on. And it would be a good opportunity for just starting out farmers or existing farmers that want to expand their properties. And if the land isn't used by somebody, chances are it will go fallow. And once farmland is not used for farming, it's much harder to bring it back to farming. To be leased, yeah, because it's watershed land. Thank you. I think that's it. Did I forget anything? Okay.
I forgot one very important thing.
Sorry, I forgot to mention this. This is very important, and I just found out about it from Deb Dewan, who now did work with Rondout Valley Growers Association and is now with Ulster Corps, that happens to be a volunteer-driven organization, right? Organizes groups of volunteers to do things. And they are having a conference on April 24th, yes, coming up, and it's called Volunteers and Transportation. And where is it going to be now?
It's going to be at SUNY New Paltz, and you go on the Ulster Corps website. I'm sorry, but it's basically there's limited space, but it would be great. Some of the ideas that have come out of this conversation, I think, you fit right in, including things like public-private partnerships and stuff. It's early morning, like 8:30 in the morning to 12:30. It's a half day, pretty neat stuff.
Great.
And we'll make sure to post that on the Moron Consultations website as well.
At our group, we basically talk more about the problems that people have and the solutions that we can do to fix them. Issues and transportation. We talked about the transportation issues, and not just for people, but for the food. The people on the panels, they spoke about how it was hard for transportation, just for people and for the food. People and their rights to necessities and services while on the job. We talked about how all workers should have fair treatment. We talked about how we liked some of the speakers. They thought and spoke more about the visions for a future for their families and fixing a broken system. Solutions. Voices must be heard to change things. Maybe educating the youth about our food system and making people more aware of what the food system is like and what it entails. The community should support ethically produced goods and a policy to support farmers.
Yeah, I don't want to add to stuff we said. I thought it was just important to mention because we didn't have a chance, but I was going to suggest we look at the little chart that's up there in our group. We didn't have a chance, but I just find it really interesting. I know it's from Canada. This is not meant it's not meant as a criticism of the wonderful, lovely organizers or anyone else, but I just find it really interesting that this is a community food system graphic. And I just wonder if you take a look at it when you go home and think about where farm workers fit into this graphic because there is no mention of them in this community. And so are they part, is there a vision, and this was made in Canada, I'm sure it's well intentioned, but the question then to me is, well, if we build community food systems, are farm workers part of the community? And do we treat them as part of our community? Or as within this graphic, are they not? And it seems like we need to answer that question.
They're farmers. Our workers are farmers.
We had two farmers at our table, two very different farmers. They both farm year-round. One of them sells at the farmers markets in the city and at a CSA. The other one sells at supermarkets and restaurants. And so we talked a lot about the problems, and the solutions were a little harder to come by. But one thing I wanted to say is there is a cooperative farming system in the valley, a group called NIFA, Northeast Farm Access, buys farms with money from small investors, and then they give farmers 30-year leases. Creek Iverson at Seedsong Farm is on one of them. Roberto and Araceli are going to be on one of them this summer, NIFA. And both of our farmers at our table agreed that the cost of farm workers going up is going to be a really big hump for them. It's going to cost them a lot more. And, you know, already they're having a hard time getting people to pay the prices that they need to charge. It's going to cost a lot more. Farmers market business is plummeting, which many of us probably don't know, but the market's saturated. Everybody's buying these food kits in boxes and buying food over the internet, and so it's becoming more and more challenging. Farmers need to have certifications to get into supermarkets, and getting all the various certifications, organic, state, federal, each one has their own set of requirements that take a really long time to apply for and to get passed through. And so it's a difficult challenge, costs money. Farmers need more customers. That's the bottom line. They need more people buying their goods. One solution for this could be more branding. You could brand regions as they do in Europe with the appellation system, based on the terroir, based on the different soils that we have here in the Hudson Valley. There's the black dirt area, there's the Unadilla soil of the Rondout Valley. So we could grow an appreciation for all those different types of microclimates and how they affect the flavor of the food. This might or might not work for most consumers. There is some skepticism about that. And we would like Mohonk Mountain House to feature more locally grown food. They do talk about it on their menus, but the amount that they actually feature might be a different issue. So we would like to see them step up and really, blazon that flag. Did I forget anything?
Talking about the issue of consumers changing and needing to find markets for other people to buy. The idea about grocery stores was discussed, and just the fact that even after you get through all those inspections, if you're able to get your food sold in a grocery store, the sales can really fluctuate based on how the food is presented, what section it's in, if it's in the organic section or not, and that a solution to that might be that we should have had Tops, Hannaford, ShopRite in the room today. Those produce managers are influential, we can influence them on how we're presenting these foods and really marketing them even more strongly to consumers.
All right. Well, this was really interesting. I think we saw some common themes. We saw some, I think, really important additional comments and point outs about, there is an influence of the larger system on what's happening here. I think clearly some of the things that we've talked about in terms of creating sort of like more opportunities for the farms to be able to represent their product, bring it to market, and like kind of what you said about like we need to find more customers or make customers more aware of what the difference is between buying local and buying sort of like other products, because it somewhere starts within that cycle there. But then on a much more sort of like local level, we're really talking about things that we sometimes take for granted. We take for granted that transportation is easy. So, but I think we all learned and kind of been reinforced it today, it is not easy. And it's not just something that can just happen through calling one or two volunteers or something once in a while. It's something that really needs to have a more sort of like permanent solution to it. But it doesn't mean we couldn't start with volunteer organizations. And I'm so glad to hear actually that the event at SUNY New Paltz is just coming up to actually take a closer look at that. Because I know I've certainly like looked in some of the work I do as part of economic development in Ulster County, where we looked at can we use UCAT to do some of this. But it is very difficult to get a public organization so like to move and pick up so like those options. So finding ways of more public-private partnerships on that, I think is going to be really important. But even just if every single one of us would say like, you know what, I didn't think about this, but next time I have time so like to actually help in the local community, even just go to my local CSA and go like, do you need help getting your product to market? How do you actually get your product to market? Can I chip in on when you need to sort of like, get your truck repaired or something like that? Little things like that might go a very long way. It doesn't always need to be the biggest sort of like change in a whole program or change in a whole system. We can start with those little things and move from there. Some of the other things I heard, and I think that was really important, is like it seemed like everybody was like, we need a festival that actually recognizes not just an organization, that doesn't just recognize the harvest, but actually recognizes everybody that's involved in actually bringing that harvest to market, and that we don't make it about it's the fundraiser with the chicken dinner, but it is actually no, we all get together in a big barn and have a wonderful dance, and it doesn't matter if you speak English or if you speak Spanish or if you speak any other language, throwing in my German accent. It's about just bringing the community together, and I know sort of like I said about like, yes, this is a chart of the community, but that's the thing, the community includes everybody. It doesn't require us to call out one individual or one particular group. It's about bringing everybody around the table. And maybe sometimes something else like just having a festival can be a great start. I certainly like, for me it was an eye-opener today to go like, yes, it's actually true. None of the signs that we have anywhere are actually in Spanish in addition to English. But so many of us sort of like constantly sort of like actually see that, but we forget about it as we go through it. So I think just making people aware of it, even like where you work, the places where you shop, so they're like, why are we not having signs in two languages? Why is the labeling on products not in English and Spanish and maybe another language? Because it is clearly possible, because if you go anywhere else in the world, you find signage in multiple languages. So, I think we just need to be aware of it and kind of look for the little things. Again, start with your local co-op, start with your local supermarket, making those suggestions to bring that into play. And hope I don't forget anything. But yeah, one of the other things I thought interesting was it was sort of on the edge of a lot of the discussions, was that the concept of the co-op, the concept of getting ownership of land and be able so that to be part of growing that. So maybe it's thinking about, there's the CSAs, but there's maybe also the concept of actually a community, I want to call it fund or investment fund, where we invest in our local agriculture community. Because then you're actually bundling the money. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about, you mentioned the Northeast Farm Access. They're bundling money to buy farmland, buy farms that have otherwise been left behind, and then give them back to young farmers that otherwise couldn't afford to actually buy land. So similarly, like, where's our investment in our community? community from that perspective, where again, bringing together the money from many different areas, plus our time and effort for volunteering could actually go a long way. And that is sort of like, the main message that we, I think, wanted to give, and maybe also like for you to take away as a thought for what am I doing in my day-to-day to really help make some of these changes. So really think about, as you're going about in your day-to-day, how can that at the same time help that overall food system? How can it help us to be really better together? So I really want to thank you all for kind of really going into this fishbowl this afternoon and just kind of like trying to say, I'm going to suspend what's going on around me. I'm going to just start focusing on farming and farm workers in the Hudson Valley. It's a difficult topic. It's a personal topic. And it's not easy, and it comes from many different angles. And it's hard to be able to cover all of those angles just in one afternoon. So think of this as just a reminder to go out in your day-to-day, sort of like to think about what are some other opportunities. And we hope that we contributed a little bit to that. We hope this was beneficial and interesting for everybody and helpful in terms of moving that a little bit forward, and look forward to seeing kind of what comes out of this and what we see sort of like developing down the line. And again, thank you for making this possible today. One other note, so like the notes from the table discussions, we would love to collect those, and we would actually take those, turn it into a summary document that again also will be available on the website, and we're also going to continue to look to push this forward. And as you kind of have different events along the lines that you want us to share and promote, please reach out to us. Last but not least, here it is, the tomato song.
Oh, they're not going to do it with mics? They don't want the mics?
Yes, they didn't want the mics.
Okay.
Ever hear this song?
What?
You ever hear this song?
Yeah.
We're going to use
John Denver?
19th century sound system.
Can you hear us? Yes. It's working. Okay. I'm going to have you do just a tiny bit more of work here, but it's more like play. You're going to help me sing this wonderful song by Guy Clark. Many of you know it. For those who don't, I'll run through the chorus, so when it comes around, you can jump right in. So repeat after me. Homegrown tomatoes, what would life be without homegrown tomatoes?
Homegrown tomatoes, what would life be without homegrown tomatoes?
There's only two things that money can't buy, and that's true love and homegrown tomatoes. There's only two
things that money can't buy, that's true love and homegrown tomatoes.
That's all you need to know. Well, there's nothing in the world that I like better than making me a sandwich, a homegrown tomato. I'm up in the morning, out in the garden, where I pick me a right one. Don't pick a hard one. You plant 'em in the spring, you eat 'em in the summer, winter time without 'em. Culinary bummer. Forget all about the sweating and the digging. Each time you go out and pick you a big one. Homegrown tomatoes, what would life be without homegrown tomatoes? There's only two things that money can't buy, and that's true love and homegrown tomatoes. one